In this video tutorial, I will look at numeric data types. Numeric data types are used to represent numbers in a Python program. And in Python, there are several built-in data types for representing numbers. The first one we're going to look at is the int, which is basically used to represent integers and can store values from a big number, about 2 billion, about negative 2 billion to about positive 2 billion. If the number is larger than that, then we use the long data type to represent the integers that are too large to be stored in int. The long data type can be used to store any values of any size, but are generally slower to work with than int. The second numeric data type you're going to look at is float. And float is basically a data type that is used to represent floating point numbers. And floating point numbers are basically numbers with decimal points. And the next one that we're going to look at is the complex numbers. Complex numbers are basically numbers that have two parts. The first part is the real part, and the other one is imaginary part. And it's represented in a form. It's written as in a form of a plus b j, where a is the real part and b is the imaginary part. The next thing we're going to look at is how to work with numeric data types. And under that, we're going to see how you can declare these numeric data types. And basically, for you to declare the numeric data types, the only thing that you're supposed to do is just assign the numeric values to a variable. For example, if you assign a number 10 to a variable called x, then we say that x is an int, or basically an integer. If we assign 20 to y is still considered to be an integer or of int data type. If now we introduce a decimal point and assign that value to z, then we say that z is a float. And regardless of the number of decimal places that you use, still the variable will be considered to be a float. And now, if you have a complex number, which is 3 plus 4j, and assign it to a variable called c, then we say that c is complex, is of the data type complex. And there are some operations that you can perform using these numeric data types. And the first operator you can use is the plus sign, or the plus operator, if you want to add two numbers. You can use the minus operator if you want to subtract those numbers. You can use asterisk if you want to multiply the numbers, and you can use the slash or the division operator to divide the numbers. And this is very important to note, two asterisks represents an exponent. You can do exponent of a number using the two asterisks, double asterisks. And then in case you want to get the remainder of a division, then we use the modulo operator or the percent operator. This is called modulo. So modulo operator can be used to calculate the remainder of a division. For example, we can find the total of x plus y. Basically, if you add two integers, because remember, x and y are both of integer type, which means the resulting sum will be of integer type. The same applies to if you decide to get the difference between two numbers, two integers, we get an integer. Likewise, if you decide to get the product of two integers, you still get an integer. But if you decide to get the division of two numbers, then you get a float. Any division of two numbers, you get float. But if you decide to get exponent of a number and an integer, then you will get an integer. If you decide to get the modulo or the remainder of x divided by y, then the difference must be a whole number, which means that is still gonna remain to be an integer. So we can execute this. Once you execute, we can check the resulting values. For example, we can check what the type of total will be. Remember that Python is case sensitive, so if you want to check the type, then this has to be capital T. But in this case, I'll correct this to be a small t for both, because according to variable conventions, variables should be represented in small case. You just use lowercase for everything. So you see that we get int for total. If we try to get the type for the difference, we get integer as well, int. We can check the division. For division, you get float. Remember, if you are dividing any two numbers, regardless if they are float or they are integers, you still get a float. And we can also check the value, the type of the exponent. We get int. And if we check for the remainder, we still get the same int. And you can also perform some operations on floats and complex numbers. And we're going to look at floats, how to do some operations with floats. Remember that we said that Z was declared as a float as well as W. So to get the sum of Z and W, we'll automatically get total to be float. Likewise, if you get the difference between Z and W, you get the difference to be float. Same applies to if you get the if you get the product of Z and W, you will still get a float. If you do division, Z divided by W, you will still get a float. We can actually run that and check and print out. We can check the value of the type of the product. If you execute this, you get is of the float type. That's for product. Same applies to diff. If I execute this, I still get float. The same applies to the division. You still get a float. And that's it for the floats. It's just straightforward. It's just like the normal math that you normally do using your calculator. The only difference is that these are variables are being created. Total is a variable that is being created, similar to difference, product, and division, and all of them are of data type float. The next thing we are going to look at is the complex numbers. We can still perform some calculations using complex numbers. And for complex numbers, you have to make sure that this is can get total, because it's a keyword. That's why it was sum was highlighted in green, meaning that it was a keyword. And if you use keywords for your variables, it's going to create some issues. So if you add C is a complex number and W is a float, if you add a float and a complex number, you automatically get a complex number. The same applies if you want to multiply a float and a complex number. You'll still get complex. And same applies if you decide to divide. You still get the same thing. And we can actually print maybe one outcome like total to see what we get. And if I execute this, you realize that you are going to get a complex number. And this complex number has two parts. Remember, this is the real part, and 4 is the imaginary component. So there's so much you can do with complex numbers, but these are good examples showing that you can still do some calculations. But just remember that you have to check. If you check the type of, maybe let's take one example like total. If you print out the type, it's gonna be of a class called and the data type is complex. So, but you don't have to use the print. You can actually just do that. If I just want to print to check the type without anything else, we just have to execute type, and then in the parentheses you put in the variable name that is being created, and if you check, you get is a complex data type. And those are ways that you can do some operations using the numeric data types. But in some cases, there are some inbuilt functions that you can use to manipulate numeric data types. For example, you can get the absolute value, which is basically it's like you're multiplying, you're just removing the negative part. If it's positive, just remain positive, but if it's negative, then it's like you're multiplying it by -1 to get a positive. So if I execute this, the output would be 3.14. This now is a function. It's an inbuilt function called ABS, which stands for absolute value. And then also, you can round off some numbers. For example, this is quite a long number with how many decimal places? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 decimal places. In some instances, we only want to round off to the nearest 2 decimal places, which means if I round off this to 2 decimal places, then I'm going to get 3.14. And round is just a function that is used to do that. It has 2 components. The first component is the number that you want to round off, is a float that you want to round off. And this digit here just indicates the number of decimal places you want to round off to. And there's also another function called power. I can say power, it is assigned power of that. So this means it's like you want to get the exponent of, or just say 2 raised to 3. This is what the power function does. You just take 2 and raise it by 3. So is basically 2 cubed. And if we execute this, and there is some issue. Oh, sorry. Now you see, you have to ensure that you get the correct function name. The correct function name here is not power, but rather it's POW. That stands for power. And we can change this to be the variable name power, because this is not a keyword, but this is the keyword. So if I execute this, now you get it to run. If I can print out these values, can print out the absolute value. If I execute, I get 3.142. Is no longer negative, but positive. If I check the value of the rounded, you get 3.14. If I print out the value of power, you'll automatically you'll have 8. You get 8 because 2 raised to 3 is 8. So it's actually working just fine. And I think those are the 2 examples of the inbuilt functions that you can use, but there are many out there that you can still use. And the last thing that we're going to look at is how to convert other data types to numeric. To convert to numeric data types. For example, here we have 3.14, which is float. And if you execute this, if you check this is gonna convert, it's going to convert 3.14 to integer. So basically, it's gonna have it as 3. And suppose that you had a string type and is 3.14, but a string type. If you want to convert it to float, then you just have to execute, and you're going to get 3.14 because it's been converted to a float type. And you might have 3, 4. 3, 4. If you convert that to complex, then you're going to have 3. The first part, 3, will be the real part, and 4 will become the imaginary part. And we might as well print these values. If we print, you can actually print all of them together: A, B, C. Make sure that you just separate the whatever you want to print, separate them using a comma. If I execute this, I get 3, which means that 3.14 has been converted to int, and the string 3.14 has been converted to float, and 3, 4 has been converted to complex and became 3 plus 4j. And you can decide to check even the type. You can just insert a new cell and maybe check the type of A. Let's see what we get. We get int. You can check for B as well. You get a float, which is true. And we can check C. If we check C here, let's see what we get. We get complex. And it means that those values inside the brackets have been converted to numeric type. It's basically switching the numeric. So to convert to integer, you just use int, and then you put anything that you want to convert in the brackets. Float, you put whatever you want to have in the bracket. Complex, you have whatever you want in the same thing inside the brackets. And that's basically it for numeric data types. And next, we will look at strings. So be on the lookout for the next video. And thank you for watching and following. Hopefully everything is all right. If something is still not clear, please do post a comment on the comment section, and I'll be able to help you. Thank you for following, and see you in the next video.